All right, so this week we're going to be looking at high-touch embedment and sustainability. This is the week where we talk about more, doing more. There is no way that high-touch embedment can lead to doing less. It's always going to be more. So the outcomes for this week are we're going to look at the intensive models of embedment, including embedding in a single class, co-teaching, etc. We're going to look at the pros and cons of these intensive models, where they might be valuable, where they make absolutely no sense, etc. And then we're going to look at some of the best practices because there are places in which this is actually worth doing. And there are ways to make it a little more manageable for the librarian who's trying to do more in these areas. So in libraries, we often argue about the strategy of broad versus deep with information literacy instruction because there is no reality in which we are going to actually reach every student to the depth in which we would like to do it. You know, to the depth in which we could actually guarantee that a student is going to come out with that every student will come out with the same level of information literacy skills, that they will be successful in using information in their lives outside of school, etc. It's just not a reality that we're going to be able to do that on our own with our resources at the library. We might be able to do that through some of the stuff we looked at last week, like Train the Trainer, or creating tutorials. There are a lot of other ways that we could be doing this. But yeah, we're not going to reach all the students. So, people argue, do we go broad or do we go deep? Do we reach a lot of students a little, which is kind of what we do with one-shot instruction. We try to reach a lot of students with a 50-minute to 1-hour session. Great. Or do you reach a few students a lot? Do you offer, instead of doing one-shots, do you say, we're just going to offer credit classes? And students who choose to get instruction this way are going to get a deep understanding of information and research and critical thinking, and they're going to come out with great skills. And those who don't just aren't going to get it. In most cases, in most libraries, you have a combination of strategies that include broad strategies and deep strategies. Deep, could be credit classes, but it also could be co-teaching a class with a disciplinary faculty member. It could be teaching multiple sections of a single class. It might be being embedded in a class for a whole term, which, can mean being physically in the classroom all the time, or it could mean, in the online world, maybe having a discussion board throughout the term. It could also mean just sitting in on the class as a member and contributing, sort of lurking in the class and contributing from time to time when it seems like the library would be helpful. As you'll see this week, these are very high impact practices. I mean, the research has shown that embedding in classes and doing a lot of instruction for a single class does impact student information literacy more than a one-shot. This is kind of a no-brainer. This is going to have a better impact. Yay. But it's also very, very resource intensive. And in libraries where we're constantly losing staff, we're being asked to do more. As you saw in the week we talked about liaison responsibilities, we're being constantly asked to do more with less, with fewer people. How do we actually make this work? Embedment does take a tremendous amount of time. And you'll see in the articles you're going to read this week that talk about the burden and how they handle it. Some say, yeah, this just isn't sustainable. Some talk about how they've changed their staffing to deal with it. One library thought they would see a decrease in reference transactions. They actually saw a 400% jump when they were embedded. So once students got more comfortable with the library, got to know the library, they were more likely to ask for help. which is actually great in one way and horrible in another if you don't have the resources to maintain both services. Another library decreased their reference desk availability to expand their embedded service. While this may be a good thing at some libraries, it may actually make the library less available to the students who are physically in the library needing help. So while it's great for those in the classes in which librarians are embedded, it's really bad for all of our other students. And in some libraries, including my own, reference desk traffic has actually gone up in recent years. It is continuing to go up at our library even while this year we did not have any growth in enrollment. So, saying we're going to cut reference hours to do this wouldn't really work. But obviously, to do a project like this, something has to be given up, and it can't just be one librarian deciding they're going to do this and just sloughing off their other duties. It has to be an effort that is agreed upon at least by that librarian and their supervisor, or hopefully by a group of instruction librarians that they're going to pick up the slack for each other. But it is possible to make this type of embedment, work. Like I was saying a moment ago, you need to clearly negotiate the level of involvement, both with your supervisor and with the class instructor. I think you can make it work if the instructor who you're working with understands at which points you're going to be involved, how involved you want to be, and you can make it not as intensive and crazy. You could have it where you're only involved at specific times, where you say, okay, the week that they have to turn in their research proposals, I'm going to come in and be available, or when at a certain point at points where it makes sense to be involved, you're involved. So you don't have to be involved in the class the entire time. Most people who embed also find that there's definitely an ebb and flow with courses. So you might be able to shift your workload around that. You might be able to say, okay, I'm going to work the desk the same average amount of time I do each term, but I'm not going to do it during the times when I know I'm going to get a lot of questions from students for that class and I'm going to be working with a lot of students. And also, we librarians do hate giving up services, but there might be services that are having less of an impact than the embedded librarian service. And over time, if you can show the efficacy of it, you might be able to say, okay, there are things we're going to give up. So I had an experience being embedded in online classes when I worked at Norwich, when I was the distance learning librarian. And I had read articles, and this was very early, this was like 2006 or 2007. I had read a couple of articles that talked about being embedded, and I thought, oh, this sounds just perfect, because a lot of our students came in to the online classes in a single cohort. So the students all took the same class in their first term. So it was a great opportunity to reach these students. So what I did was, in the first class in 3 of our most research-intensive programs, it was diplomacy, military history, and criminal justice, I was embedded. So I had a discussion board where students could contact me within the classroom, and where I also would proactively provide advice, like when I knew a research assignment was coming up, or they had to turn in a proposal or something, I would provide support sort of proactively as well. And the good thing about it, I had great interactions with students. I mean, it was in some of the classrooms, I got a lot of questions. It was really helpful to the students and to me I certainly got to know the needs of the students a lot better that way. Like I said, great opportunity to provide proactive instruction. When I know something's coming up in the class, I could say, hey, and since you're going to be doing this, you might want to take a look at this tutorial I created on blank. The faculty and students were super keen on it. They loved it. And While I called it a pilot project, they were very, very attached to the service. And when in the end we decided to discontinue it because it wasn't having quite the ROI um, we were hoping for, it was very hard to back out of that. And that's always something to consider when you're doing this, is that you, even when you say something's a pilot, when you are trying something, people will get attached to the service. So you need to think about what your exit strategy will be, how you can get out of this if it really doesn't work out. Because often we call something a pilot when really we mean we're doing this no matter what. But, we call it a pilot to work out the kinks. Um, so on the bad side, we had, I think at the time we used Blackboard, and the learning management system was amazingly cumbersome. I didn't get any sort of alert when a student had posted a question, so I had to check. I believe at one point it was like 12 different classrooms every single day to see if there were questions. Um, Also, I had to be available all the time. So, I went on a trip. I went on vacation. I had to check the discussion boards because it happened to come at a time when students were turning in their research proposals in military history, and I was getting tons of questions. And if you are embedded in a class, they expect you to be just like their instructor, readily available to them all the time. You know how we talked about the embedded librarian is not interchangeable. Well, that's a good thing and a bad thing sometimes, because you're not always available 24/7, or you may not want to be. Um, I found in some classes I was getting a lot of interaction and others nothing. So every day when I had to check the learning management system, I would spend at least an hour a day going through each classroom and answering questions. Um, when in some classes I didn't have any questions at all. Um, we found that during the time that I was doing this, I did it for about a year and a half, reference traffic on the desk, our virtual reference traffic decreased, and we pretty much figured out that it was all actually going to me instead. So um, it wasn't an ideal model for what we wanted to do. We found that being more available wasn't actually increasing students' ability to contact us. They were just contacting me instead of the reference desk when normally they had contacted the reference desk. So it wasn't a great fit at Norwich. It may work great at other places, but it just wasn't worth the amount of time I was spending each week wasn't worth it when students didn't seem to have any trouble asking the reference desk for help. So, you'll read a bunch of articles this week that make it pretty clear that while this is important and valuable and great, it is largely unsustainable to actually be embedded in classes. It does not scale up in any sort of way. So why would you do it? And at some places, it's probably not worth doing. But there are reasons why it might be worth trying. There are a lot of political reasons to do it. Maybe a really influential faculty member is asking you to co-teach a class. I had a situation like that where a very active and important faculty member in art history asked me to co-teach a class with her. Well, that's a no-brainer. Even if it's just a one-off, it's a great way to build political capital with her. It's a great way to try something new and maybe explore new ways of collaborating with faculty. If there's a political reason to do it, it may absolutely be worth doing. You may be able to do it just in a small number of classes that are critical for a major, like a research methods class in a major. It might be worth being embedded in a much more intensive way. But you can't do this in the majority of classes in any area. So, you really need to sort of deal with people's expectations, because you may get faculty members saying, hey, you're doing this in the research methods class, why can't you do it in mine? And you need to have an explanation for that. Possibly trying it may help you understand your students better. I know being embedded, I learned a lot about my students. I learned a lot about the curriculum that I would not have learned if I wasn't that intensively involved in the class. You may, through co-teaching especially, be able to train faculty members to cover that content in the future. So it may lead to sort of a train the trainer approach, and that may be absolutely worth doing then. So there's lots of reasons why this could be worth doing, even if it doesn't necessarily scale. So here's a couple of things to consider if you're going to do this. Make sure your boss is aware of the time commitment this is going to require. Like I said before, you really, while you may have a lot of autonomy as a librarian in an academic library, you need to make sure other people are on board with this because it's going to impact more than just you. Because you may have to juggle responsibilities, you may have to give things up, and other people will have to pick up the slack. So you need to have other colleagues, and especially your boss, on board. Also make sure that you can moderate faculty expectations. That, like I said, when a faculty member says, hey, you're doing this in so-and-so's class, why can you do it in mine too? You need to make it clear that you are strategically choosing certain classes to work with, and that's what you're doing. You know, it also may be just a one-off. I'm not sure why I said it can't be a one-off. I must have miswritten there because, you can actually do something as a one-off, like I was saying before, for political reasons, for learning about the population reasons, for train the trainer reasons. It could just be a one-off, but you need to make sure that faculty understand that, because it could be a huge disappointment if you end up not doing it again and they expected it to be a regular thing. So enjoy the readings this week. I'll be very curious, especially with this somewhat controversial topic, to see what your thoughts are on high-touch embedding in libraries.